Hello, everybody, and welcome to Connecting for Kids speaker series. This is our speaker series on Help My Young Child Won't Listen. So if you read the description of this program, it's actually a program all about auditory processing, which is something that even I, as a staff member for Connecting for Kids, didn't know that much about. So this is a really, really interesting topic, and I think will help a lot of us understand our children's behaviors a bit better. My name is Nicole Born-Crow. I am the program manager for Connecting for Kids. So I will be helping to facilitate this program tonight. Paula and Neysa, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Neysa McKenney. I'm a speech language pathologist, mostly focusing in pediatrics at this point. I've worked for the Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disabilities for 40 some years, and have recently retired and came aboard with Connecting for Kids, where I work with Paula, my co-presenter tonight. I also work part-time at a private practice in Westlake, mostly focusing on pediatrics at this point. Paula?
Okay, hi, I'm Paula, and I'm an early intervention specialist, and I also work for Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disabilities for many, many years. I retired 9 years ago, and since then, I've been working for Connecting for Kids and also work for a private occupational therapy firm. Throughout my years, I taught in inclusive kindergarten, preschool, also worked in our toddler program. And I think one thing that Neysa and I talk about that was really invaluable for both of us is through the county board, we had the opportunity to do a lot of home visits. And through those home visits, we really grew to understand families and the challenges and that families face. So let's get started.
All right. Okay, we're just going to start out with the statement that good listening skills are necessary for successful learning. We're going to talk a lot about hearing and auditory processing and listening tonight, and how those three things affect learning. Okay, next slide. All right, there is a difference between hearing and listening or auditory processing. So on your screen, you can see that hearing is listed on the left-hand side. When we think about hearing, we think about the function of the ear. So we know that the ears gather sound from the environment. So the outer ear takes in the sound, sends the sound to the middle ear, and then into the inner ear. And then from the inner ear, the inner ear then fires the sounds up into the brain for interpretation. Okay, so that's the part where hearing begins and ends. And then it's the brain's job to do the other part of listening and auditory processing. So when we think about listening and auditory processing, what do we do with those sounds now that they're in our brain? We've heard them because the ear has helped us hear them. But now what do we do with them? We have to process them in some way. We have to understand them. We have to make sense of them. We have to act upon them. So that's the job of the brain. And those things are auditory processing. Understanding what the sounds represent, understanding what their words represent, being able to act upon those words and sounds in some fashion. When we look at the hearing side, we know that hearing is measured by a pure tone hearing test. And many of the children that I work with, and many of your children probably have had a pure tone hearing test. That test can be performed by the school, either by the speech therapist at the school or the school nurse. It can be performed by the pediatrician or the audiologist. So if you suspect that there's something going on with your child's hearing, maybe because you've had ear infections or you have something that's affected the development of the hearing system, then the audiologist is the person, or the pediatrician is the person to see. And then the most important thing, I guess, about listening and auditory processing on the bottom in bold is that your child may be able to hear. So the hearing mechanism is working and the sounds are getting to the brain, but maybe they're not being processed quite well. So what are the skills that are needed for listening and processing the things that you hear? Well, we broke them down into 4 categories. The first one being awareness. Oh, I hear something. What is that? Just noticing that there's a sound somewhere in the environment, attending to the sound, and then actually localizing to where that sound might be. So that would be under the awareness piece. And then there's the discrimination. It sounded like a pop. No, I think that might have been a bang. So being able to discriminate between sounds, what they mean and what did they sound like? So for example, the environmental sounds, was that a horn? And was it a truck horn or was it a car horn? Was that the siren on an ambulance? Was that a knock at the door? Was that a barking dog? What sound was that I heard, and do I know what that was? And then there's the identification. And this is more like the associative thinking that happens when you hear a sound. So for example, when I hear a beep, I think of a car. When my dogs hear a motor coming down into my cul-de-sac, they automatically think it's the FedEx truck and go running to the window. When your child hears the garage door open or hears the back door open, maybe that means daddy's home from work or mommy's home from work. So identifying the sounds and making sense of the sound there. And then there's comprehension, which is basically understanding what's being said or what's being heard. So this would then allow you to act on the information that you have. So following directions, following a conversation, you know, I say something and then you say something related because you understood what I say. Answering questions, understanding the lines in a story or the verses in a book, and filling in the blanks.
All right, we listen for different reasons. We listen to figure out what we're hearing. We listen to music and TV and stories, etc., for pleasure. We listen to communicate with other people, and we listen to learn and understand. And I probably could have added 3 or 4 or 5 more different reasons why we listen. But what's critical to understand is that what we are listening to and why we are listening will influence how intently we need to listen, how carefully we need to listen, and how each kinds of input are going to be processed, that auditory input. So it's important to understand that we listen differently depending on what we're listening to and why we're listening. What are good listening behaviors? Now you can get on and Google and, you know, get a list of what are good listening behaviors. And I will guarantee you that the first one here, looking at the speaker, is going to be on that list and is probably listed as the #1 thing that indicates that you are exhibiting good listening behaviors. But what Neysa and I would like you to know is, for some children, looking at the speaker gets in the way of children's listening. Some kids cannot look at someone and be using their eyes and their visual system and be listening at the same time. We see kids all the time that need to shut down the system. In other words, they need to close their eyes or look away in order to be more attentive and to listen better. So just think about that. Just because your child isn't looking at you doesn't necessarily mean that they're not listening. It could be that they really cannot manage all that input coming in through their eyes and all that input coming in through their ears, both at the same time. We want kids to pay attention to people's body language and their facial expressions. That's another indicator of, oh, you're listening to me. We want to take turns to exhibit that we're paying attention, that we're listening, that we smile and we nod and we don't interrupt. Again, that's a tough one for a lot of kids. If we ask questions and we offer ideas, That shows that we are actively listening and also retelling and commenting. Active listening is two-way communication, and we need to hear and understand what is being said. Messages from our sensory system, vision, hearing, taste, movement, etc., they all pass through the same areas of the brain. And sometimes our auditory messages can get drowned out. If you think about it, you can think about it being sort of like a traffic jam where things get slowed down because there's all this input coming in from all of our different senses. And there's a chance then that that auditory message is getting distorted in some way or even getting drowned out.
So who is more likely to have difficulty with listening and auditory processing? Children who have or have had sensory processing disorders definitely are going to be in this category for the reasons that Paula just spoke about in the previous slide, is that all of the senses, hearing, touch, taste, seeing, vision, and movement are all competing in the brain and are all trying to be processed at the same time. And if you have a sensory processing disorder, often it's the auditory channel that might get left out or drowned out in all of the confusion and all of the competition that's going on in that brain. I also attend kids with attention deficit disorders or hyperactivity disorders. And I want you to think a little bit about the words filter and focus. So having the ability to filter out background noise in order to focus on what's important or what's salient is necessary for good listening. So let's take a little scenario real quickly. Let's think, okay, we're just going to do a typical scenario at home. I'm in the kitchen and I'm busy in the kitchen trying to get things ready for dinner, let's say. And my kids are in the living room and the TV's on, the boys are wrestling, and I need my daughter to come into the kitchen to help me with something. So I call from the kitchen and she probably doesn't hear me in the living room because there's so much going on there. So she doesn't have the ability to filter out the TV, the boys wrestling, and everything else that's going on in order to hear my voice. And if she did have the ability to filter, maybe she can't focus on it because there's so many more interesting things going on than my voice calling her to the kitchen to help me. So as you go through your day, just think about that a little bit and think about our kids in the classroom or in the daycares. There's all kinds of competing messages going on. You've got things being shuffled around. There's kids walking in the hallway. There's kids playing on the playground. The teacher's talking. There's a small group over here doing something. The boys are clanging the blocks down with the cars. And then you're supposed to all of a sudden filter all of that out and pay attention to the teacher who's giving a direction that says stand up and come to the door. That's really a lot of work. We expect kids to be able to do that, but that's a lot of work. And so that's why teachers and parents need to give cues to help get kids' attention before they expect them to follow some simple directions. Obviously, medical history like meningitis, low birth weight, prematurity, congenital or prenatal infections, lack of O2 at birth, chronic ear infections, some of those could impact hearing, the hearing system and the development of the hearing system, and therefore then listening and comprehension and auditory processing. Behaviors that may indicate that your child is having difficulty with auditory processing. This is a very, very long list. And we might look at this list and say, oh, those are, sometimes I think of my child as misbehaving, or they're emotional, or they're tired, or they're weepy. Sometimes it's because kids spend a lot of effort filtering and focusing throughout the day in order to process the auditory information, that they do become tired. They're super tired. So let's look at some of these behaviors. Kids that are easily distracted. They become easily distracted. being easily distracted affects auditory processing. Sorry about that. Because the other sensory systems are competing. They have trouble staying on task. They go to do something and they get distracted along the way because another sensory system is taking over and causing that distraction. They don't follow directions, or they don't complete the directions that are given. They become overwhelmed and they have meltdowns. So we're looking at misbehaving or having behavior difficulties. They're exhausted when they return home from school. And this, again, is because they're doing so much work. Their brain is doing so much work trying to manage all those sensory systems and listen and do all day long, because the school environment is a very auditory environment, unfortunately. And kids who would have short attention spans because listening is hard, so they just turn off their listening skills. So just remember that listening takes energy, and some children become fatigued by trying to put forth all that energy all day. So that's kind of an important thing. So if your child comes home from school tired, that may be one of the reasons. Okay, next slide.
So what can we do to promote children's listening skills and their understanding? Now, Nicole, I believe, sent you a lovely little flyer that has that same heading. Well, I can't really see myself, but anyway, and I wrote all over mine. But we need to think about, all right, so we've talked a little bit about listening and auditory processing and the difference between hearing and listening and processing, etc. But okay, what can we do to help our children improve these skills? So first and foremost is the first one that we listed there, which was speak more slowly, okay? Sometimes we just rattle off and we talk very quickly, and a child might need a little more time to process what we're saying. So let's speak a little more slowly to help them. Saying things more simply. All right, it's time for us to go to Target now. So we need to get ready. So why don't you go get your coat and your shoes, okay? So that's a whole lot of information coming in. So sometimes we might want to think about speaking more slowly. We're going to Target, go get your shoes, okay? Breaking information into smaller chunks, okay? And especially when we're giving directions, think about, we talk about giving one-step directions and then two-step directions and then three-step directions. If our children are having difficulty attending to us and following one-step directions, then or two-step directions, then maybe we need to back up and make one-step direction. Go get your shoes. And then once they've gotten that, and say, all right, put your coat on, rather than saying, go get your shoes and put your coat on, all right? So think about that, giving directions more one step at a time. Waiting. This is something that Neysa and I talk about a lot with families is you don't know what's going on inside of somebody else's head. So when you say, and I keep saying, go get your coat, there's a lot of things your kid has to think about. Well, what is my coat? Where is my coat? I have to get up and walk over there or crawl over there to get my coat. And then I've got to probably put it on. Well, if we say, go get your coat, and then 2 seconds later we say, go get your coat, we might be derailing your child's thought process on what they need to do in order to follow that direction. So sometimes we need to give a direction and just simply take a few breaths and wait and allow them that time to process that direction that we just gave. Hopefully that makes some sense there. And the second one on your flyer is reduce background noises and distractions. And Neysa talked already about that ability to filter and focus. And so many of us do that innately without a whole lot of thought or without a whole lot of effort. You know, the dog is barking and the light is buzzing and whatever, but we're able to filter those things out and focus on this riveting presentation on auditory processing and listening. And also to understand, it's not just auditory distractions that we may want to try to eliminate or put a handle on to improve our kids' listening. It might even be something like, we had a child who was very distracted and very intensely processed smells, so that his mother had to have him go upstairs in order for her to cook certain foods, or he would be so distracted and so agitated and by certain smells even. So again, you just don't know what those distractions are, but if we want our child to be listening to a story, or we want to be talking with them, or we want to be sharing some information, think about eliminating or toning down some of those other sensory distractions. Neysa?
Okay. The third one on your flyer, when you get it, will be sure you have your child's attention before speaking. Now, that seems to be obvious, and sometimes we think we have our children's attention, but we truly don't. Because again, we are competing with all of the other sensory input that's coming into your child's body at the time that you're trying to get their attention. So ways to get your child's attention would be to touch them, get down at their level and look them in the eye, to speak slowly and speak clearly and speak in small segments so they understand what you're saying. And maybe even use some strategies like show them what it is you're talking about. What is it you mean? Show them interpret your words into action so that they can understand what you're trying to tell them to do. Other ways that you can do this in a fun way is to whisper. Whispering is very catchy in terms of getting a child's attention. I do that a lot in the therapy room. We parents tend to raise our voice to get attention, but really if you lower your voice and whisper, kids are like, whoa, she must have something really important to say because she's whispering, I better listen up. Chanting. So we all chant when we do Teach Me to Play, we chant, clean up, everybody clean up, or walk, walk, walk. We chant the direction so that we have some music coming into the message, and that activates not only the language side of the brain, but also the music side of the brain. So now we've got double brain power going on, and kids are more likely to listen if it's presented in a fun musical way versus let's walk or let's, do whatever. Singing, don't feel bad about singing your directions. Barney was very famous when he sang the cleanup song. So let's carry on with that and let's sing some of our directions and get our kids' attention and get them to follow what we want them to do. And changing the tone and pitch and the volume of how we say things. Sometimes we just talk in a ho-hum fashion. Use a silly voice, use a quiet voice, use a man's voice, use a girly voice. Change your voice up a little bit and make it fun. So those are some of the ways that we can help kids listen. And then on the bottom of the flyer are the super fun ways that we can help kids listen. And this is the category called play. And you all know that Paula and I are all about play. That's why we are involved with Teach Me to Play. So engaging in playful activities such as singing and chanting and whispering, those all work the muscles of the ear. And like any other muscle that we want to develop, we need to work it a little bit and we need to practice with it. So the more we can give it practice and the more we can work the extent of that muscle, because part of the brain and part of the ear listen to low frequency sounds, mid frequency sounds, different parts listen to high frequency sounds and process them. So there's a lot of muscles and brain power that go into hearing different frequencies, different decibels of loudness, different types of voices, different types of sounds. So the more we can practice that, the more sophisticated the hearing system will be, and the more it will be able to understand what it's hearing, which is the processing part. We want to think about treating the auditory system as a muscle. It needs practice in order to strengthen it. So some ideas for doing that would be reading aloud with your child, and maybe even using silly voices for each character in the book. Or sometimes, like the book I like to read is Red Hat, Green Hat, Yellow Hat, oops. So at the end, there's a silly voice, oops. And it's also a fill in the blank, a repetitive verse, so a child can process that it's their turn to say that word when you read the book over and over again. It's very predictable, and we've talked about reading to your child in a previous session. Other things to do would be to play games, listening games like Simon Says, or other listening games like, they're calling it here the broken telephone game. It's also, it's called the whisper game, which you whisper into someone's ear. You whisper a word, and it could be a very simple word like cookie. And then they go and whisper it into their brother's ear. And then their brother whispers it to their sister. And you go around the house and you do that, or you're around the table and you do that. And the last person speaks the word. And is it the same word that we started with? If not, we can laugh about it and try and figure out what the differences are and what the breakdown was. Or we can get it right and celebrate the fact that we were good listeners. So that's actually a very fun game. Listen and do songs, plenty of those on YouTube videos. A lot of those are the nursery rhymes and the finger plays and the preschool songs where, you do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around. And then lastly is, retelling stories. So you tell a story. Remember the time we went camping and Grandpa burnt the marshmallows over the fire? And then you tell that story a couple weeks or months later. You start with, remember the time we went camping and Grandpa, what did Grandpa do again? And see if your child can retell the story, because then wow, not only did he or she listen to the story, but he also processed it, and now he can retell it. So those are all, important things that involve the processing of language and listening to language.
All right, so what can we do? This is just another one. If you suspect that your child has a significant difficulty with auditory processing, you'd start by talking to your pediatrician. They can recommend an evaluation by an audiologist, a pediatric occupational therapist, or a speech language pathologist. And a Connecting for Kids family resource specialist like Nicole, or I know we have a couple others, can help you. So just to know that there's a lot of help out there for you, and that Connecting for Kids can help you connect with that help.